The silence inside the private room was heavy, almost unbearable. Princess Anne sat still, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her expression composed yet fragile. For someone known throughout her life for unwavering strength and discipline, this moment was different. This was not about duty or tradition. This was about truth. A truth that had waited decades to be revealed. The envelope resting on the table before her carried more weight than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't ceremonial. Yet its contents held the power to reshape everything Anne thought she understood about her family, her past, and the woman the world knew as Princess Diana for years. Questions had lingered quietly beneath the surface. Unspoken curiosities. Half-answered conversations. Subtle inconsistencies that never quite aligned. Anne had always dismissed them as speculation, the kind that followed the royal family endlessly. But this time something felt different. The test had not been taken lightly. It wasn't about curiosity or doubt, it was about closure. A final piece of a puzzle that had remained unresolved for far too long. As the results were placed in front of her, time seemed to slow. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Anne's breath caught as her eyes moved across the page. At first, she said nothing. Then her composure faltered. Tears welled in her eyes, not from shock alone, but from emotion long buried beneath years of loyalty, duty, and restraint. What the results revealed confirmed what Diana had once quietly hinted at, a truth she carried alone, protecting others even at her own emotional cost. A truth that reshaped how certain moments from the past suddenly made sense. For Anne, it was overwhelming. Memories surfaced. Moments once dismissed as coincidence now felt painfully clear. Conversations she hadn't understood at the time echoed in her mind. Diana's expressions, her silences, her guarded words, they all aligned with heartbreaking clarity. This wasn't betrayal. It was understanding. Anne's tears were not of anger, but of sorrow. Sorrow for what Diana had carried alone, for the weight she bore in silence, and for the compassion she had shown even while enduring her own pain. Those close to Anne say she struggled to speak afterward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't react dramatically. Instead, she sat quietly, allowing the truth to settle into her heart. The kind of truth that doesn't shatter, but reshapes. The bond between Anne and Diana had always been complicated. Respectful, yes, but layered with distance and misunderstanding. Now, with this revelation, that distance felt tragic rather than deliberate. What struck Anne most deeply was the realization that Diana had protected others at her own expense. That she had chosen dignity over explanation, silence over defense, and love over recognition. The room remained still as Anne finally spoke, softly, almost to herself. Her words were not ones of shock, but of reflection, of regret that this understanding had come too late. Those nearby were deeply moved. No one expected such vulnerability from the woman long known as the strongest of the royal siblings. Yet in that moment, her humanity shone through. Outside the room, the world continued unaware. No announcements were made. No statements prepared. This was not a moment meant for headlines, it was a private reckoning. But the emotional impact was undeniable. For Anne, this discovery reshaped her memories of Diana entirely. It painted her not as a figure of controversy, but as one of quiet resilience and unspoken sacrifice. A woman who carried more than anyone ever realized. As the hours passed, Anne found herself reflecting on legacy. Not the kind written in history books, but the kind felt in the heart. She understood now that some truths are not meant to be revealed loudly. Some exist simply to bring peace. There was sadness, yes, but also clarity. And with that clarity came a sense of release. She wiped her tears and took a slow breath. The past could not be changed, but it could be understood. And sometimes understanding was enough. Later, as evening settled, Anne remained alone for a while. The weight of the moment lingered, but so did a quiet sense of connection. A feeling that, at last, Diana's voice had been heard. Not through headlines, not through speculation, but through truth. And in that truth, Anne found something unexpected: forgiveness, compassion, and a deeper respect for the woman whose legacy would forever shape the royal family. As the light faded, one thing became clear. Some secrets are not meant to divide. But to heal. And this one, finally revealed, had done just that. The hours that followed felt strangely suspended, as though time itself had softened out of respect for what had just unfolded. Princess Anne remained seated long after the room had emptied, her thoughts drifting between past and present. The truth she had just absorbed did not scream or demand attention. Instead, it settled quietly, reshaping memories she had carried for decades. She thought of Diana often in those moments, not the public figure the world had adored or criticized, but the woman she had known privately. The laughter that once echoed through palace corridors. The moments of vulnerability that had gone unnoticed. The resilience that so often masked quiet sorrow. With each memory, Anne felt a growing sense of understanding, one that softened old judgments and replaced them with compassion. The revelation had not rewritten history, but it had reframed it. Small moments from the past suddenly carried new meaning. Conversations that once felt unfinished now made sense. Even the silences, once confusing, sometimes frustrating, now felt deliberate. Protective, almost selfless. Anne had always been known for her emotional restraint. She did not wear her heart openly, nor did she allow sentiment to guide her decisions. Yet now, alone with her thoughts, she allowed herself to feel everything she had once set aside. The grief was not sharp or overwhelming. It was quiet, steady, and deeply human. She reflected on how much Diana had endured without complaint. The expectations, the scrutiny, the loneliness. Through it all, Diana had carried herself with grace, even when the world misunderstood her. Anne realized that strength often looked different from the outside than it did from within. As the day progressed, the palace continued its rhythm, unaware of the emotional shift taking place behind its walls. Staff moved about with professionalism, unaware that something profound had changed. There were no announcements, no raised voices, no visible disruption. Yet beneath the surface, everything felt altered. Anne found herself walking slowly through familiar corridors, noticing details she had long overlooked. The echo of her footsteps, the filtered light through tall windows, the stillness that followed her movements. It was in these quiet moments that reflection deepened. She thought about legacy, not titles or history books, but the emotional imprints left behind. What people remembered not by record, but by feeling. Diana's presence, she realized, had never truly faded. It lived on in subtle ways, in empathy, in compassion, in the unspoken connections she had nurtured. What struck Anne most was the realization that Diana had carried her truth alone, choosing silence not out of weakness, but out of love. Love for her children, love for stability, love for a world that often misunderstood her intentions. That choice, once misinterpreted, now revealed itself as deeply courageous. As the day wore on, Anne allowed herself a rare vulnerability. She acknowledged the regret of not asking more questions, of not listening more closely. But regret, she realized, did not have to lead to sorrow. It could lead to understanding, growth, and peace. There was comfort in that realization. Later, as evening settled, Anne sat by a window overlooking the quiet grounds. The fading light mirrored her emotions, soft, reflective, calm. She felt no anger, no bitterness, only a gentle acceptance that truth often arrives when we are finally ready to receive it. The bond she now felt toward Diana was different from before. It was no longer shaped by distance or misunderstanding, but by empathy. A recognition of shared humanity beneath the weight of duty and expectation. The world beyond the palace remained unaware of this shift. There would be no announcements, no interviews, no headlines. This was not a story meant for public consumption. It was personal, intimate, and deeply human. Anne understood that some truths are not meant to be spoken aloud. They exist to heal, not to provoke. And in that quiet understanding, she felt a sense of peace she had not known before. As night fell, the palace lights dimmed once more. The day had brought clarity, not closure, but perhaps closure was never the goal. Perhaps understanding was enough. In the stillness, Anne allowed herself one final moment of reflection. She thought of Diana not as a symbol or a memory, but as a woman who had lived, loved, and endured with remarkable strength. And with that thought, a sense of calm settled over her. The truth had been revealed, not to disrupt, but to heal. And in that healing, Something beautiful had quietly taken root. Compassion, forgiveness, and a deeper connection that transcended time. The quiet that followed felt different from anything Princess Anne had known before. It wasn't emptiness, nor was it grief. It was something deeper, a stillness shaped by understanding. The kind that settles only after emotions have run their course and truth finds its place without resistance. She sat alone for a long while, her thoughts drifting gently, no longer weighed down by confusion or unanswered questions. What had been revealed was not a single moment or a single truth, but a broader understanding, one that framed the past with compassion rather than judgment. It was never about facts alone. It was about perspective, about seeing someone not through expectation or duty, but through humanity. For years, Diana had been spoken about endlessly, praised, criticized, misunderstood. Her story had been told and retold by voices that never truly knew her heart. Yet now, in this quiet space, Anne felt closer to her than ever before. Not because of words or documents, but because of empathy. A recognition of shared pressure, shared loneliness, and shared strength. She remembered moments she had once dismissed, brief glances, thoughtful silences, expressions that lingered just a second too long. At the time, they seemed insignificant. Now they felt like messages left behind, waiting patiently to be understood. Anne exhaled slowly, allowing emotion to move through her without resistance. There was sadness, yes, but also peace. Understanding had softened the sharp edges of the past. What once felt unresolved now felt complete. The palace around her remained still. Its grand halls, often filled with history and expectation, now felt like a quiet witness to something deeply personal. No one rushed her. No one interrupted. It was as though the world itself recognized the weight of the moment and chose silence out of respect. As time passed, Anne reflected on how differently things might have been if understanding had come sooner. But regret no longer had power over her. The past could not be rewritten. Yet it could be honored with honesty and grace. She thought about how easily people are misunderstood, how strength is often mistaken for distance and composure for coldness. Diana had carried both strength and vulnerability with extraordinary poise, even when the world failed to recognize it. That realization stayed with Anne, reshaping her memories with compassion. What struck her most was not sorrow, but admiration. Diana had endured with quiet dignity, even when misunderstood. That kind of resilience deserved respect, not judgment. As the afternoon light shifted, Anne rose slowly and walked toward the window. Outside, the world moved forward as it always did. Life continued, unaware of the quiet emotional transformation taking place within those walls. And yet, something fundamental had changed. She realized that closure does not always arrive with answers. Sometimes it arrives through understanding, through the gentle realization that people do the best they can with what they carry. That understanding brought with it a sense of peace she had not expected. Later, when she finally left the room, her steps were lighter. Not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer weighed so heavily on her heart. She carried it now with acceptance, not regret. Those who passed her in the corridors noticed something different. A softness in her expression. A calm that felt genuine. No one asked questions. None were needed. As evening approached, Anne found herself thinking not of the past, but of what lay ahead. Of the importance of compassion, not just for others, but for oneself. Of the strength that comes from understanding rather than control. She understood now that truths do not always arrive loudly. Sometimes they come quietly, asking only to be acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, healing begins. The world outside would continue to speculate, to analyze, to seek meaning in fragments. But for Anne, the meaning had already settled gently within her. It did not need explanation or validation. It simply was. As the day faded into night, the palace grew still once more. The lights dimmed, shadows stretched softly across the walls, and calm returned. In that calm, Anne allowed herself a final moment of reflection, not on loss, but on growth. Not on what had been hidden, but on what had been revealed within her own heart. And as the silence embraced her, she knew one thing with certainty: some truths do not break us. They heal us. They remind us of our shared humanity. And in that understanding, peace quietly takes root. The final hours of the day unfolded with a quiet gravity, as though the world itself had slowed to honor something unspoken. Princess Anne stood alone once more, not in solitude, but in reflection. What had begun as confusion had gently transformed into clarity. And with that clarity came a sense of peace she had not anticipated. She had spent much of her life standing strong for others, for family, for duty, for stability. Emotion was something she managed carefully, never allowing it to interfere with responsibility. But now, in this moment of stillness, she realized that strength also meant allowing oneself to feel. To acknowledge what had been buried beneath years of expectation and silence. The truth she had come to understand was not loud or dramatic. It did not demand explanation or explanation to others. It simply existed, calm, grounding, and deeply human. It was the kind of truth that reshaped the heart without ever announcing itself. As evening settled, Anne found herself reflecting on how often people misunderstand one another. How easily stories become distorted when seen only from the outside. Diana's life, she realized, had been one of constant interpretation by others, rarely allowing her the space to simply be. And yet, through all of it, Diana had carried herself with grace. Not perfection, but sincerity. Not defiance, but quiet courage. That understanding softened something deep within Anne, allowing compassion to replace old assumptions. She thought about how time alters perception. What once seemed unclear now felt obvious. What once felt distant now felt intimately familiar. Perhaps that was the quiet gift of reflection, the ability to see not just what happened, but why it mattered. As darkness settled beyond the palace windows, the world outside grew quiet. There were no cameras, no whispers, no expectations. Just the gentle passing of time and the steady rhythm of breath. Anne allowed herself to sit with the emotions fully, without rushing them away. There was no need to be composed now. No need to perform strength. In this private moment, vulnerability felt like a form of truth. She realized that healing does not always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from acceptance, the understanding that people act from places shaped by pain, hope, and love in equal measure. And that understanding can be enough. The bond she now felt toward Diana was not one defined by history or circumstance, but by empathy. By the recognition that both of them had walked paths shaped by duty, expectation, and quiet sacrifice. It was not regret that filled her heart, it was respect. As the hours passed, Anne rose slowly and moved toward the window once more. Outside, the grounds rested beneath the night sky, calm and undisturbed. The stillness felt comforting, as if the world itself was offering reassurance. She thought of how easily moments slip by unnoticed, and how rarely people allow themselves to truly reflect. Yet here she was, in a moment that would quietly shape the way she carried herself moving forward. There would be no public acknowledgement, no statements or clarifications. This was not a story meant to be shared. It was one meant to be felt, and in that private understanding, she found something rare: closure not built on answers, but on peace. As she prepared to leave the room, she paused once more, taking a final breath of the quiet. There was no heaviness now, only a calm acceptance that felt almost comforting. Some truths, she realized, do not demand attention. They gently reshape us from within. The world beyond the palace walls would continue as it always had, questioning, speculating, searching for meaning. But for Anne, the meaning was already clear. It was not about the past being rewritten. It was about the present being understood. And in that understanding, something beautiful had taken root. A sense of connection, a sense of forgiveness, a sense of peace. As the night deepened, Anne walked away with steady steps, carrying with her not sorrow, but quiet strength. A strength born not of certainty, but of compassion. And though the world might never know the truth behind that quiet moment, it would echo in the way she moved forward, calmer, gentler, and finally at peace. Because some stories are not meant to be told aloud. They are meant to be felt. And in that feeling, healing begins.